Hey, hello, hi. Hello there fellow viewer, my name is Gabriel and today I am bringing you my August reading wrap-up. I read a total of 5 books this August, which is a pretty okay number for me. Summer months, I am usually more on top of my reading game than I was this particular August. But the thing is, I am in the midst of moving yet again. So I was not able to read as much as I would have liked to, but I was still able to read some interesting books. Let's get into it. First 2 books I want to talk to you about are probably already familiar to you if you have not been living under a rock in the book community for the past like 5 years. And these books are the A Court of Thorns and Roses trilogy, series, whatever it is she wants to do with these books. I read the first 3, A Court of Thorns and Roses, Court of Mist and Fury, and A Court of Wings and Ruin, and boy, do I have things that I want to say. My overall opinion on the books was pretty negative. I was honestly anticipating something so much more intricate and worthy of all the hype that I have seen it receive year after year in the book community. Even though I have been away for a while, it is a book series that the hype just does not die down. I just want to look into the camera and say, why have not other books surpassed these honestly vastly inferior works of young adult? And I'm really sorry if you're a fan of these books, but they just did not sit well with me. I think I could honestly go on and on for about 3 solid hours on what I didn't like about this book. So I have restricted myself to trying to say 2 things I liked and 2 things I didn't like. Let's try to start with the things that I enjoyed about these books. How flimsy it all was, which of course in itself is already not a very good thing. What happened with these books was that I had to keep telling myself and forcing myself to accept things that I wouldn't normally excuse in other works of fiction. The fact that this world building is just honestly pathetic was something I just forced myself to enjoy. Because the thing is, if I hadn't ignored this aspect of the book, then I would not have enjoyed it at all. I just told myself, even though this book is taking itself way too seriously for what it is, you are not going to take it seriously at all. What happened was I did end up forcing myself to enjoy how just entertaining it was, how unabashedly fun I just took it to be. For a book that takes itself this serious, there's just way too many flaws for me to enjoy it the way I'm pretty sure Sarah J Maas intended to, and the way I'm sure a lot of readers do. It's fun if you're not looking for a fully developed world or remotely believable characters. The third was downright enjoyable when you ignore the fact that the foundation for this book was to just very subpar books. Kind of made it fun to read, like that's it, like there was no seriousness to it in my opinion. Which leads me to my first negative point, which is this world. I don't even know what this is, honestly. If you want to read a good, fully developed fairy world, you go and read the Folk of the Air series by Holly Black, which in itself is another can of worms. It really bothers me when there is a whole species that is supposed to be completely different from the human species and evolves in the exact same way. These fairies are not fairies, they're people with pointy ears and wings. There is literally nothing else different about them. They work in the exact same way, except they say male instead of man and female instead of woman, which did creep me out. I have read young adult fantasies that are just so much more developed in terms of different species and different ways of life. I have lost my train of thought. I have no idea if I was on a positive, probably a negative point. And I still owed you guys another positive point, which I am literally racking my brain trying to figure out what it is I did enjoy about these books. Oh my god, what did I like about them? The bar is so low that to me a positive in this book series was the coherence between the second and the third book. I read the Throne of Glass series by the same author years ago and I dropped it because you could tell from a mile away she was making it up as she went along. That to me personally is a huge pet peeve, when the author doesn't have the scope of the story at least remotely in their head. And there's a switch of tone between all of the books, but I completely gave up after Queen of Shadows. I did finish that book. The reversal of the story that happened in that one was just way too much for me, and I have been mad at that series for the longest time. And I thought, okay, maybe Sarah J Maas something different in the Equitar trilogy, and oh my god. The 180 that happens in between the first and the second book is just preposterous, okay? It's ridiculous to the point of just So I'm going to point out the coherence between the second and third book. That is my second positive, and as you can tell, it's not that strong. And I'm not even going to talk about a second negative because I'm pretty sure I have already... No, wait, characters. Oh my god. Like, you don't even have to go far to get good characters. Like, honestly, just pick up literally any of the books that are behind me. It was just sad. It was sad, the things that Sarah J Maas did to some of these characters. If you're wondering why the hell did you read them if you didn't like them, here's the thing. I put off things into the distant future, and I had been meaning to read this series since I was 15 years old. But the next book I really want to read, and that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. I am presently 21. I had a friend who recently read them, and she owned all of them, so she was like, here, have them, read them. So I did. And I owed it to past me to actually do this, and I fought through them. The last book was actually pretty enjoyable in the way that it could be, but I finally ticked off A Court of Thorns and Roses from the series I need to read list. I was doing a live on TikTok with this friend of mine, and her @ is right here. Please go follow her. She is absolutely brilliant. All her TikToks are book related, fandom related. They are fire, okay? Fire. Anyway, I was doing a live with her, and I reached the conclusion that A Court of Thorns and Roses is fast food. It is cheap, commercial, popular fiction that is very easy to indulge yourself with. It's very entertaining, it's superficial, but there is literally nothing beneath the surface. And that's on the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. As you could probably tell, I have a lot of crap to say about this. I honestly think that you should be paying more attention to other books and other authors instead of perpetuating the honestly toxic storytelling that you can see in Sarah J Maas's books. Like I was saying, it was fast food, and I need a good home-cooked meal after that. So I picked up a book that I had bought in 2019, so last summer, that I had been keeping for a special time, and that was The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is a classic dystopian novel published in 1985 originally. I have this beautiful hardcover edition that you can't tell is beautiful because, you know, it's a camera. The end papers are gorgeous, and there's an imprint of the handmaid on the naked hardcover. I started watching the show when it came out, and I was immediately intrigued by this world. What Margaret Atwood does in this tale is she makes this dystopian future so realistic that it is scary. The book only heightened this. The TV show does do a masterful job at getting inside Alfred's head, but this is a book, so obviously you will get the extra insight. It was just honestly petrifying to be inside the head of this handmaid. It is set in a future where most women are now infertile, or most men are now sterile. I'm not entirely sure. And in this future, fertile women are forced to breed in order to repopulate, to, you know, not let the human race end. It is very, very dire, it's very dark, it's very adult. This is definitely not a book for younger readers. It touches on a lot of serious themes. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. Oh my god, I just realized I didn't rate the Ekotar series. My Goodreads is down below, people. I don't want... It was exactly what I needed after coming out of Ekotar. To be fair, the world building in this isn't particularly strong either, but the writing is absolutely beautiful. Margaret Atwood knows what she's doing. Something that also took my breath away was the cliffhanger with which this book ends, and the fact that this is a 1985 novel that people expected no sequel at all from. Imagine reading this book at the time not knowing that there's a sequel. Like, it's insane. I think that the TV show does go beyond the cliffhanger that this book ends on. The pacing is personally very hard for me to follow, but it is a beautiful show. And if you're not interested in the book, please consider checking out the TV show if you are into more serious themes. It is very dark again. I don't know when I plan on reading the sequel, which is called The Testaments, I believe. And it was released last year. It was announced in 2018, which really prompted me to, you know, pick this one up, even though I would be another year before I bought it and another year before I read it. And yep, that's on The Handmaid's Tale, everyone. And the last book that I read this month was also a classic dystopian, and it was A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, or Burgess. I'm really sorry. I will call this man Anthony because I can pronounce that. I bought this at a used bookstore just before I left from my year abroad in South Korea, and I had been meaning to read this book for a very long time. I had always heard about the movie and about how amazing this book was, and let me tell you guys, it's real. The hype is 100% worth it. This is... Come on. It is worth every wonderful thing that I've ever heard about this book. This skyrocketed to like one of my favorite books ever, possibly, and definitely a highlight of this year. A Clockwork Orange, like I mentioned, is also a classic dystopian novel. It was released in 1963. This one is definitely one for older audiences, readers, well, audiences as well, because the movie. I remember hearing great things about the movie, and when I found out it was a book, I decided that I wanted to pick it up. But of course, in typical Gabriel fashion, I put it off for years until I saw this in the used bookstore. So I was like, you know what? It's now or never. I don't regret it minimally, okay? This book was superb. It is set in a not so distant future UK. Thinking about it, this book was written probably 1961, 62. And the era that it's describing is probably the present days that we're living in today. Obviously, it's never explicitly said when this book takes place, but I would anticipate it to be sometime around now, which is actually very interesting. The only thing I knew about this book was that it had a movie, and the movie was particularly violent. I am not a fan of violence in the media that I consume. However, the way that I saw people talk about this book and this movie really made me feel and think that the way the author used violence in the novel would be to progress some kind of message. I definitely recommend you going into this without knowing too much though. Literally the only thing I knew about this was that there was a scene in the movie, an infamous scene in the movie, with a glass of milk. That was all that I knew. So I do think that prior knowledge before diving into this one should be minimal. Still have two heads up that I want to give before I finish on A Clockwork Orange. The first one is that there are a lot of made-up words used in this book. We are never given any explanation as to what they are, so you have to figure it out. There's a very interesting passage that the author writes in this author's note at the beginning that says that the language has been a barrier to people picking up the book, and I definitely think that it was very tough at the beginning. Maybe the first 50, 60 pages it was kind of hard to push through, but as soon as you got it, it was okay. The author wrote this in a way that you would get the message even if you didn't understand every single vocabulary word that was changed, and there are a lot. And then the second thing that I want to mention is that there are two main editions of this book that were published in English. Now this might be an outdated warning, like over 50 years have passed since this book was originally published, but what happened was the American publisher decided to completely remove the last chapter, whereas the British publisher did not. The author does touch on his author's note about how the perception of the story changed over the years based on this one tiny detail. And I do want to briefly touch on this last chapter because for me it was what made the story. It was what solidified everything. It was what contextualized every single decision and every single thing that the author had written up until that point. It is what made the story worthy for me. It's why I literally cannot find the words to describe how much this book made me feel, how it made me question so many things, was because of the very last chapter. And trying to put myself in a situation where I would read this book without the last chapter is kind of mind-numbing, because it would be such a different story, and one that I would probably not very much agree with. Stanley Kubrick, the director for the movie, adapted the American version. So the version of the story that was perpetuated, seared into people's mind, was not the original edition, which is insane. The author also mentioned that in his author's note about how the movie is not the take that he had intended, it's not the way that he had wanted readers to come away from the story and the message that he was trying to get across, because what this book is a message. Every book should have something that you can take away from it, but this one is honestly just, it is a lesson. It's something that makes you question everything that you know and every certainty that you have. And Anthony Burgess himself says it is more didactic, is that how you pronounce that word? Didactic? Well, educational than it is artistic, which is what he intended, you know, not to preach, not to impose, but to show, to lay out the cards and have you pick them. This book is extremely philosophical in the way that it makes you question notions of good and evil and what is just, what is unjust. It really also makes you question the way we treat criminals, the way we treat people who are deemed delinquent in society. It makes you think about free will and the gift of choice and what it would mean to have that taken away from you. It really does give, it's just so good. Okay, that's literally all I can say. So what I would have you do is, if you want to assimilate the story in the American way, consider looking for an American edition that does not have the last chapter, because even though this is an American edition, the last chapter is included. But if you want to feel and live through this story the way it was intended, the original way, look for the very last chapter, which is the 21st or the 7th of the 3rd part. I honestly think that were it not for this last chapter, this book would not be the life-changing ride that it was. Like, I mean,
it was just so good, okay? It was just read it, please. It was
I will highlight once again that this is an adult, classic, violent dystopian, so if you are a younger one, I would suggest putting it off for a couple of years, because the thing is, you do want to read this with a more mature mentality, because if I were to read this when I was younger, I would definitely not have come away the way that I did from this book. I would just not have understood it the way that I did now, and I'm really glad that I did wait. I have no idea whether or not I'll be watching the movie, because again, it was basically an adaptation of the American edition, and the lack of the original ending just doesn't make this a story that I would advocate in any way. I don't know, we'll see. And that is it, folks. As you can see, I really like to talk. It was only 5 books, and this video is already however long it is. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I would love to know if you read any of these books, what you thought, what are your opinions on A Court of Thorns and Roses, because if you liked it, please tell me why. And this is where I sign off again. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope I see you next time, whenever that is. Goodbye! And that is it. I don't have the echo loud. But the thing is, I'm in the midst of and these books are the Accord of Rose. What I liked about these books was that, oh, fuck, Jesus Christ, no, there is a huge ass wasp that just came in because I am that lucky guy.